So everybody's talking about the suicide and how could this possibly have happened? It must be a conspiracy. Even Donald Trump, president of the United States himself, is saying there's a conspiracy here. So let's start with just your analysis of the fact that this guy was able, apparently, allegedly, to commit suicide in his cell despite having just been on suicide watch.
Well, there's no question about the fact that there are some suspicious factors that would cause reasonable people to think that maybe there's something going on here, and certainly merit further investigation, which I understand Mr. Barr has said is going to be taking place. But, on the other hand, and, what are some of those suspicious things? I mean, the fact that he should have been on suicide watch. He'd already attempted to commit suicide once, allegedly, and for some reason or other was pulled off. Even in the cell he was in, he was supposed to be looked at every 30 minutes, and that didn't take place. And then all of a sudden, some people might say mysteriously, his cellmate was removed from the cell, and he's left there all by himself. Now, a lot of people would say those are a lot of suspicious factors. On the other hand, okay, what we're talking about are government screw-ups. And let's face it, okay, the government screws up. There's a lot of very talented and competent and capable people working for the government, but there's an awful lot of people who work for the government because it's an easy job, and the assistant United States attorney who works nights and weekends and juggles 15 cases, he doesn't get any more than the guy who does one case at a time. And so and it's the Bureau of Prisons, and the Bureau of Prisons does not necessarily attract the best and the brightest, and the union head for the prison guards says they're badly understaffed at that particular prison.
Yeah, tons of overtime. Yeah. Also, apparently, that prison is known for a lot of squalor.
Yeah, and so it doesn't surprise me if a lot of the stuff that happened, which looks suspicious, is just attributed to incompetence. And I have to say one thing further, and you may disagree with me on this, but if there was ever a person on planet Earth who had lots and lots of reasons to kill himself, it was Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, I think that they were really after him this time, and there wasn't going to be a deal, and he was never going to see the light of day. Here you get a guy who's supposedly a billionaire, estates, the freedom to engage in his perverse sexual conduct, and let me just say, by the way, as the father of two daughters, I mean, I'm really offended by the sorts of things that he was allowed to get away with. But all of a sudden, he was going to be living in a hole for the rest of his life. He probably couldn't even be released to the general prison population because people who prey on young girls sometimes don't last that long, even in the federal prisons, and so. He was never going to see the light of day. He was never going to reassert mastery over his life and career. And so, I imagine that, he had good reason.
Okay, well, that leads right into what I want to talk about, because I do want to focus primarily on what happened in Miami and how he got off in Miami. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think the two are so related, because he was able to get off in Miami. He hired the dream team of dream teams. He had Kenneth Starr, Dershowitz, a couple Black. He had some. Put OJ's dream team to shame.
He had a lot of talent.
Right. And the guy is apparently not quite a billionaire, but he's worth about $500 million. Mm-hmm. So we know, and that's a lot more money than OJ had. And by the way, OJ got off, mm-hmm. right? So Epstein got off in Miami, effectively, 1 year. OJ got off with his dream team. So why would he suddenly think that I'm not going to be able to pull this off again? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, I mean, I don't think the word "got off" is really appropriate. I mean,
but because we're going to dig into that a little bit more. But before we dig into that, okay, let's say he didn't get off. It was 2 years. He ended up being 1 year. Bottom line is that ain't bad. You don't kill yourself, right, Russ? You don't kill yourself over potentially spending a year in prison. You kill yourself if you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. So why would he assume, Russ, very important, why would he assume that in the New York case, I'm going to jail for life, whereas in the Miami case, I was able to get off? When the two cases are essentially the same.
Okay, because public perceptions of that kind of conduct and public perceptions of Jeffrey Epstein in particular were a lot different. In in the South Florida 2008 plea deal, a lot of people didn't know who Jeffrey Epstein was. A lot of that
because
stuff,
his attorneys did a great job of keeping it very quiet.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff could fly underneath the radar.
But the allegations were the same, though. Hold on. The allegations was that he abused over 30 girls. This is in the 82-page prosecution memorandum and 53-page indictment in Miami outlining everything. And it includes that he, listen to this, Epstein directed persons to abuse the girls, in addition to his own sexual abuse of the victims, Epstein directed other persons to abuse the girls sexually. Epstein used paid employees to find and bring minors to him. Epstein worked in concert with others to obtain minors not only for his own sexual gratification, but also for the sexual gratification of others. And they had 40 girls. That's the Miami case. That's a major case.
Okay. Let's talk about what happened there. Okay, and first off, I agree with you. There's some outrage that should be directed as to what happened, although I think it's being misdirected, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But he was able to cut a deal because there wasn't a lot of publicity, and the federal prosecutor involved.
Who cares about publicity?
The federal
prosecutor is supposed to prosecute the law.
Okay, trust me. Okay, if you don't think that a prosecution, being the sort of thing that gets reported in the headlines of the local papers, doesn't have an impact on the conduct of the prosecutors, well, of course it does.
Okay, but it shouldn't.
Okay, it maybe it should not, but we live in the real world where there's real people and people are concerned about public perceptions, and some of them are ambitious.
But you lived with these prosecutors for many, many years, and if this case came across your desk, where this guy is not only, you got 40 girls that are underage that this guy sexually abused or pimped out, and that he was running an underage prostitution ring. Isn't that somebody you really want to go after?
Okay.
These are the people. Sorry, last one. These are the people that when they get in prison, everybody wants to kill them when in prison. You tell me prosecutors don't have the same attitude about these guys?
First off, let's look at the situation that has existed when the feds got involved. Okay, when the feds got involved, the state prosecution authorities had already decided what they were going to charge. Had already charged Epstein with procurement of prostitution. Nothing with respect to minors. Okay, it was a charge that, number one, likely would have resulted in no jail time at all, and number two, would not have required Epstein to register as a sex offender.
And Acosta has said this, and he says that's why we stepped in, because we couldn't let that stand.
We couldn't let that stand,
right.
and so what they did was, I think they did three things, which demonstrate to me that they weren't in Epstein's pocket, but were really interested in coming to a reasonable result. And part of that result involved, not having these girls have to testify. They would have had to disclose these girls to the Dream Team. The Dream Team could have...
The girls are pissed off at the deal that he cut. They were ready to testify.
Well, no, that's not true. Okay, that's not true. Okay, there was and Villafania, the prosecutor, she filed a declaration with the federal court. It was detailed. It was entirely reasonable, and she was having tremendous difficulty getting these girls to testify. One of these girls, in fact, she was being represented by a lawyer who was being paid by Epstein. Okay, and was basically saying, well, my client doesn't want to cooperate. You give her complete immunity, which simply wasn't available for that sort of thing, and she won't testify. But an awful lot of the girls said, look, I want to put this behind me. I really don't want any further involvement in this thing. And she had an interest in protecting what the victims wanted, which was anonymity and not having their lives put under a microscope by Epstein's extremely well-funded Dream Team, who would clearly go into their records with a fine-tooth comb and find every bit of dirt about these girls, and that's something that the federal prosecutor, wanted to avoid. Okay, now.
Well, okay, but you had 40 girls, so you got a lot of girls to go through. So you got a lot of potential witnesses. But yes, they're up against the Dream Team. I could see them cowering in front of that Dream Team. Is that what you think happened?
No, not cowering, but whenever you're making a deal, whenever you make a deal, there's a number of factors that you take into consideration, and one of those factors is how likely it is we're going to get a result that's better than what we could negotiate.
Okay, but how is that any different than New York?
Well, in New York, they just had, and maybe it wasn't. Okay,
I think he had wimpy prosecutors in Miami at best.
No,
Either there was some type of underhandedness going on,
well,
or you just had prosecutors that just wimped out. I mean, they were sitting on the motherlode. They had Jeffrey Epstein. They had him. All they had to do was go to the island. Now they're going to the island.
Yeah.
Did they ever go to the island? Did Miami go to the island?
Yeah.
The FBI just went to the island for the first time yesterday.
Okay. Here's the thing. Again, you had wimpy prosecutors, but I don't think they're on the federal side. Remember, on the state side, and by the way, it's the state government. The feds, they have, a statutory rape statute, which I'm looking at right here for underage girls. But that's not something that's typically a federal concern. Most of those things are handled stateside because most of the time there's no federal jurisdiction for that sort of thing. But
whatever pressure they exerted on the feds, they also exerted on the state. The same explanation for the sweetheart deal the feds gave him is the explanation for the sweetheart deal the state gave him.
Well, you keep saying sweetheart deal. Now let's talk about that, okay? Because everyone's saying, well, the 18 months that was negotiated, that's unreasonable.
Well, sorry, Russ. Let's start with the state deal. Was the state deal a sweetheart deal?
No, the state deal was clearly a sweetheart deal.
Why?
And
why? Hold on. Let's stop right there. Why did the state give Jeffrey Epstein a sweetheart deal? Why?
Well, I don't know, and frankly, there hasn't been enough light shined on this thing after he was committed to state prison. As you know, he went into a work release program.
Right.
So basically
the state was weak on him twice. First, they wanted to prosecute him only for picking up a prostitute that wasn't even underage. Mm-hmm. Then when he does get in prison, they let him out 6 days a week, right? Something suspicious is going on at the state level.
And
right?
by the way, the sheriff who was responsible for that work release, or at least the sheriff who oversaw, I mean, he's still the sheriff there. Why isn't there some inquiry into his conduct? And here's the thing, by the way, to make the work release thing even more outrageous is what he was convicted of did not qualify for work release. The company that he supposedly went to work for didn't really exist. I mean, it was a company that he created for the sole purpose of having some place to go to work release, which as soon as his term ended, the company no longer existed. So the whole thing was a put-up job just to get Jeffrey Epstein out of jail. And there are allegations that when he was theoretically serving time in the state prison for having molested underage girls, that he was continuing to molest underage girls, where he was theoretically serving his sentence for that. So I think the thing is,
at least you and I agree that the state went light on him. The question,
and do you know, by the way, how much, by the way, that Epstein paid the sheriffs for this work release program? $127,000. Okay, and of course we know that.
He paid for it. Why? Because he had to pay for the time of officers to go with him or something?
To surveil him, yes. Mm-hmm. Officers who, by the way, called him Mr. Epstein, okay, while they were, protecting him and guarding him.
What is your theory as to why the state went so light on him?
My theory, okay, and I don't have any evidence of this, but I think it's something which I understand the governor of Florida has said he's going to investigate, and he should investigate, but it would surprise me not at all if it turns out that there was some corruption involved and that there was money changing hands, either in the terms of nice campaign contributions for local district attorneys and the sheriff, who, by the way, are all elected officers.
So you're willing to allege corruption on the state deal, but you're not willing to allege corruption on the federal deal. Why not?
Because the state, there was no good reason whatsoever to let Jeffrey Epstein out on work release, and the feds objected to that. Okay, if in fact, the prosecutor was corrupt when, and was in Jeffrey Epstein's pocket and was being paid off, why, when he went on work release, did the prosecutor, Villafana, write a very detailed letter to the sheriff saying, hey.
It turns out there's so much horrendous shit that Epstein did that we're learning more and more about, that he just killed himself a couple days ago. And you're the prosecutor in Miami, and you've got the case. You've got 40 girls. You know that he's pimping out underage girls on an international level, according to the complaint. And an international level, And you're sitting here trying to justify it to be an 18-month deal?
Okay.
He just killed himself over this.
Okay. Here's what you got to understand, and you've seen a lot of irresponsible reporting in the press that says, "Oh, he was facing a life sentence," and that's just nonsense.
Okay, what was he facing?
Okay, well, first off, he would have been sentenced under something called the sentencing guidelines, which is a thick book about a small.
What is the sentence, Russ, for molesting 40 underage girls? You tell me. And pimping them out internationally.
Okay.
What is the sentence?
Here's the deal. Okay, I'm looking at and the way the sentencing guidelines work is you've got to figure out what the offense is. You've got to figure out what the guideline level for that offense is.
I raped 40.
Okay.
I raped 40 14-year-olds.
Okay.
You tell me what the sentence is for that.
I'll tell you what the sentence is for that. Okay. The sentence is for that. If he pleads guilty, he's somewhere in the neighborhood of 33 to 41 months. Okay.
For raping 40
okay.
14-year-olds.
Well, okay. First off, we don't know that they were 14. Okay.
Let's just say they're underage.
Okay. Well, to see underage, that begs the question. Okay. Underage under which body of law? And this, by the way, is another good reason for keeping the case in state court. Okay. Because under federal law, the age of consent is 16. Okay. Under state law, the age of consent is 18. That means if you prosecute federally, all the girls that are 16 and 17 years old, okay, they don't get to be victims. The abuse of them is not a crime. How many of those 40 girls were 14 and 15? That's really the question you should be asking yourself. And frankly, I don't know the answer to that question, but those are the only ones that count in a federal prosecution.
Well,
okay,
that's the first I've heard that, so I'll give you credit for that.
Okay, well,
that's the first I've heard. But I've got because nobody's saying this, Russ. Nobody's saying this. You're saying the age of consent under federal law is 16.
Yeah,
you got to be for it to be underage. The girl has to be 15 or younger.
Yeah, 18 United States Code Section 2243. Your audience could look it up. Sexual abuse of a minor or ward, and there's two sections. One is for 12 years and younger, and one for 16 years and.
Well, I'm glad
younger.
that there's two levels. I've always thought that there should be two levels because it gets more and more disgusting the younger they are.
Yeah.
So you're saying
and of
if
course
they're under 12, it's more serious.
Yeah.
If it's under 16, now when we say serious, let's just stay on this for a second. Are we talking felonies or misdemeanors here?
Oh no, we're definitely talking felonies.
Even for 16.
Okay, and somebody looking at this statute, somebody looking at this statute is going to say 15 years. Okay, it says right here in the statute. It's written right in here. It says 15 years.
15 years what?
15 years is the maximum sentence you could receive for having
for
violated
molesting a 15-year-old.
For molesting a 15-year-old.
Okay, they alleged 40.
Okay. So you stack those up, and he's got multiple life sentences, right?
Yes.
Except and that's the sloppy stuff that reporters do because they don't understand the sentencing guidelines, which no question about it are complicated. What you have to do is you have to take that statute, you have to plug it into the book. And you got a base offense level of 18, and then you say, well, we've got multiple victims. So how do we deal with that? Well, there's a section in the sentencing guidelines that deals with that said for every group of unrelated counts, and let's assume that every different victim is an unrelated count, you add one, but here's the thing, to a maximum of 5. So the way the sentencing guidelines work, okay, the first 6 victims, you get and then after that, it's it's all just free. Now
you don't keep adding on to that.
You don't keep.
Is that true with all sentencing guidelines, or just as it pertains to underage?
No. That's typically true. If you're somebody who's done a string of bank robberies, for example, each bank robbery would be unrelated, and so there's no point in charging any more than 5 or 6.
What about with murder?
Well, for murder, it doesn't really. The sentencing guidelines is going to be so high that it doesn't matter how they relate. But yeah, I mean there's a section that deals with how to deal with multiple crimes that doesn't differentiate between the crimes.
So what you're saying is raping 40 underage girls is the same as raping 5, essentially.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Okay, that's how you work the sentencing guidelines. Okay.
From a sentencing perspective, it's basically the same.
From the perspective of the people who wrote the sentencing guidelines, and I mean they just didn't write it. I mean what they did was they looked at the sort of they did a survey of sentences which had been handed out over the decades and tried to write a guideline that reflected that. And by the way, I'm not a fan of the guidelines. Okay, no prosecutor I know is a fan of the guidelines.
Okay, but
but the reality is that that's what the assistant U.S. attorney handling this case, Villafana, that's what she was looking at.
Okay, so let's go back to the numbers. You said that it maxes out at 5 girls at 15 years each. So that'd be 75 years.
No, because then, okay, you've got a base offense level of 18, okay, you add numbers to that. You can add 5 numbers to that. Okay, so 18 plus 5 is, and here, can I show this is the chart. Okay, this is more of an accounting thing than a prosecution thing, but this is the actual chart that you use from the sentencing guidelines. And over here on this side is the offense level, and over here is the criminal history. And this, by the way, I'm assuming that his criminal history was 1. I don't know that it was more than that. Although the pre-sentence officer is very good about finding stuff that people did a long time ago that you wouldn't know. But at any rate, and right over here is the column that gives the number of months. And so you take 18, which is the basic offense level for the crime that he would probably have been charged with, and you add 5. And then if he pleads guilty, you subtract 3 because that's the benefit you get when you plead guilty.
And what do you end up at?
And you end up at 33 to 41 months. And it's just math.
Okay, but hold on a second. Is that what he's facing in New York then?
No.
Okay, why is he facing more in New York than he faced in Miami?
Okay, now, for one thing, they're charging him under a different statute than I believe would have been charged. They're charging him under a statute that alleges that he was
sex trafficking?
No, that used force and coercion. Okay. Now I got to tell you something. I mean, I've read a lot about this case. I've looked at the charging documents. I looked at the indictment that came out of the Southern District of New York. I don't really see any evidence of coercion. I see that he used money to get these victims to do what he wanted them to do. But I don't see that he used force or held them against their will or took their passport and wouldn't give it back, or the sort of things that constitute coercion. So I'm going to tell you, I think that the Southern District of New York might have overcharged the case, because I think they might have charged stuff that they couldn't prove. But with the light of day on this thing, you want to put something very aggressive out there, and then you work to try to prove it.
Where are the New York state charges? Should there be New York state charges?
I mean, typically, this type of crime it happens on a state level, and that's another thing. I'm really not sure what the jurisdictional hook is. I mean, if a guy robs a 7-Eleven, okay, that's not a federal crime.
Right.
Okay, the FBI could be right there. They can grab him. Actually, they probably don't even have authority to arrest him because they didn't see him committing a federal crime.
But if you flew girls from Florida to New York?
If you flew girls from Florida to New York, that probably constitutes a Mann Act violation. You've probably got a federal crime. But typically these things are handled stateside. But with a guy like Epstein, it's not a bad idea to have the feds involved, because the feds have resources that although the New York district attorney has got no shortage of resources.
Let's say all the girls were of age, because you've raised something important, that really the girls had to be 14 or 15.
14 or 15.
So, but let's just assume they were all of age. They were 16 and older, but he's running a major prostitution ring. How many years do you go to jail for running a major prostitution ring?
Well,
not for just being a John in Miami. I mean, in Vegas with a few girls, where you're flying them back and forth and setting them up with overseas and this and that. A major prostitution ring.
Okay, my understanding, okay, of the charges against Epstein as they existed back in 2008 was not real. I mean, he was not doing a commercial business. Okay, he was not a pimp who was renting out these girls to Johns and making money on account of that. I mean, this was primarily a matter of gratifying his own perverted tastes. There may have been some instances, and this has certainly been alleged.
It was alleged in that case that
rich and powerful people were allowed to access these girls, but I don't know that any of them paid them for the privilege. I mean, this is just, hey, you're my buddy, We're having a good time over at Epstein's house. I'm bringing the girls.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, it may have been because they didn't investigate it sufficiently. They didn't go to the island.
Well, they said they certainly didn't go to the island.
Yeah.
Okay. And
so for some reason, even though it was, and I have not read the full indictment, but it was a 53-page indictment outlining numerous federal sexual offenses committed by Epstein.
Yeah, I have to tell you.
53 pages a lot for an indictment?
Okay. Yes. But you do it that way. You do it that way because you've got to charge. Used to be back in the day when you were looking for restitution. Okay, you could convict a guy on one count and then, bring in the evidence that shows he was guilty of all these other crimes against all these other victims and have them all get restitution. But the Supreme Court said, no, that violates people's constitutional rights. And so now, in order for somebody to be entitled to restitution, you've got to put that particular count in the indictment and you've got to convict him. He's got to plead. Or he's got to be convicted by a jury of that particular count, or else that victim does not get restitution. And so, as a result, it's going to be a big indictment because you got to put it all in there. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing: why didn't they raid the island sooner?